lawyers have cooperated because of a scheduling problem with one of the defense attorneys. We're going to move into the rebuttal case of the state, except for the one witness that has a scheduling problem, and then I'm allowed the state to call the one witness that relates to that testimony. But, and I appreciate y'all working this out. I mean, I was inclined to just tell Mr. Knox, tough luck, but you know, y'all have worked it out, and that's okay. I appreciate that, and that's what I would tell the jury, but it's not intended to, you know, change the order of presentation in the grand scheme of things. We'll have defense case, state rebuttal. So anybody have any question about that?
Just one thing, Your Honor. Mr. Fuchs and I had discussed, he's indicated if they don't get the material witness warrant for Kelsey Kennard, that they plan to play the former testimony. And you know, is saying kind of his reason for doing that is because it's part of rebuttal. I can't impeach him as effectively. What I would, and that is a smart tactic. However, he gave a very different version of the events to Investigator Basio, and I think it would be fundamentally unfair to not put his prior inconsistent statements in front of him. Last time that was less than 10 minutes of testimony. I would ask if Kelsey...
I'm not quite following. Did you call Basio last time?
Yes, sir, to impeach Kennard. Basically what happened was Kennard gave very, very few details, said the gun was hidden in the engine block of the vehicle, and very little else. Then came into court and offered a whole bunch of additional details, and I called Basio back to impeach him and say none of that was offered initially.
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing is I'm going to have to hear some testimony about Kennard to determine whether he's unavailable or not. So I guess the state's going to give me some evidence on that before I make a determination that they can do that. But if they do that, it would appear to be appropriate. If you have significant impeachment of him, I frankly have forgotten that. But I think the way to do that to make it kind of line up appropriately would be to also provide Basio's by video. Fuchs, you have a problem with that?
No, Your Honor, I'll have to go and pull the video. I can't remember off the top of my head whether or not we had any additional questions on that addition to the
The Basio you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's any additional questions at that point because it was done differently. It was done during the state's case in chief with Kennard last time, and therefore Mr. Prince may have called Investigator Basio and asked him these questions and asked him additional questions because I know he called him in this case as well, but I'm not sure that they can't.
If it's going to be a problem, I guess we'll call Basio live, but it seemed to me that
I think we probably edited it
appropriate.
out.
I mean, the fairer way to do it would be to do them both by video than to have one live and one by video. But I mean, if you want to call Basio, if you think we should call Basio live, I'm good with that. I'm trying to balance it out.
I wasn't saying that, Your Honor. I was just saying that was just
Right.
all
Well, y'all
I was
look at that
thinking
and
about
see.
the video.
Y'all look at that and see, but it seemed to me the fair way to do that would be to call Basio by video also. We just have to see if we can do that. I assume he's available, but when you've made a determination that you are going to want to play Kennard's prior trial testimony, I am going to need to hear some testimony on what efforts have been made to get him here. I mean, I assume based upon the motion, I saw that there is a predicate for that, but I think we need to make a record of that.
Yes.
Further.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, see y'all at 9 o'clock.
Thank you.
You'll have your witness in the court.
Yes.
Court is back in session.
Got a jury, please.
Remain standing for the jury.
Everybody have a seat. Good morning, folks. Thank you for being back here. Look, somebody just lost their pen over the side. Deputy, would you help them, please? I do appreciate y'all always being timely, reliable. One of the most reliable juries I've dealt with. Sometimes we have one or two that are time challenged, and we have to deal with that all the time. I appreciate y'all being very timely and responsible. Is Ms. Hawkins what we're going to present next?
Yes, sir.
All right, the next testimony is going to be presented to you by video. There is a transcript of it. As I've told you before, rely upon what's said on the video, not what's in the transcript, but we give you that transcript to help you follow along. Ms. Hawkins Clark has had medical problems and could not be here, and that's why we're presenting her prior testimony by video. So you should take it just like you would live testimonies. Everybody got the transcript? Looks like Mr. Brill's missing one. I think, are we missing one?
Yes.
Got one more?
You can have one.
Here we go. Now he's got two. All right. And this is part of the defense case, correct, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir.
All right, you may proceed with it. This was what we were having technical problems with yesterday, so hopefully it's working today.
If you face the clerk and be sworn, please. Ma'am, raise your right hand and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
May proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
Okay. Good evening. My name is Temeika, T-A-M as in Mike, E-I-K-A. Last name Hawkins, H-A-W-K-I-N-S. I'm hyphenated Clark, C-L-A-R-K. And please pardon my voice. I have a big voice, and I think I've utilized it too much. I have two kids that, because I'm handicapped.
That's enough.
Okay, so
We're not here for a conversation. You'll ask you questions and you can answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. How do you know the defendant, Mr. Segura?
he's my daughter's father.
Okay. And your daughter, Janae, that's his daughter as well, correct?
Correct.
Was she a child that y'all had together during the course of his marriage and outside of his marriage?
That's correct.
Okay. At some point after Janae was born, did you obtain a child support judgment against Mr. Segura?
Yes, sir.
And how much was that for?
The monthly amount?
The total amount of arrearages owed at the time you got the judgment.
The total amount at that time was somewhere about 20, maybe upward of $1,000.
Okay. And in the process of collecting that judgment or attempting to collect that judgment, did you get Mr. Segura put in jail at some point?
I sure did, yes, sir.
Did you get his driver's license suspended at some point?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you obtain a lien against any tax returns or tax refunds that he would receive?
Yes, sir.
Did you, in fact, obtain annual tax refunds that were supposed to have gone to him?
Yes, sir.
Okay. After you got that big child support arrearage judgment, did he come to court and deal with that? Or mediation, I guess. Did he come and deal with that?
Oh, during mediation? Yes, sir, he did.
Okay. And as a result of him going before the judge and dealing with it, did the judgment get reduced by about $10,000?
Yes, sir, he did.
Okay. After he got put in jail and got his license suspended and all that, did he make some efforts to comply with the monthly payment requirements?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But did he ever pay in full? Did he ever pay the full monthly amount regularly like he was supposed to?
Yes,
let me rephrase that.
Okay, thank you.
Aside from when his wages were garnished,
Okay.
did he ever voluntarily pay the full amount?
Voluntarily pay the full amount? Not always.
Okay. It was sporadic, but he was making efforts to pay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And once he was making some efforts to pay, he never got put back in jail or anything like that, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, in fairness, he also was able to avoid payment too, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did he work under the table at certain times?
Are you asking facts or my opinion?
Well, did you at some point find out through investigation that he was working under the table?
I, in fact, found out that he was working no longer in Florida.
So there's two different things. He was working out of state, correct?
Correct.
And that inhibited your ability to collect from him?
Correct. It inhibited my ability to collect the garnishment.
You would have to essentially chase him from state to state and try and get
Correct.
different child support judgments everywhere, right?
Correct.
And also, did he change employers from job to job so he was never with a single employer?
That's correct.
So realistically, your ability to collect from him outside of Florida was nil.
Yes.
Notwithstanding that, he did make efforts to pay you and buy things for Janae, correct?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
He kept in contact with Janae. Janae had her own phone. And I want to make sure you all are hearing me correct. If there's any point, let me know. Janae had her own phone, which was monitored, so he would keep in contact with her. And when things came around, such as school, pageants, and pageants got pretty expensive, Mr. Segura, I came through with getting what was needed for that, as well as traveled and supported her.
Did he at every point exhibit resentment of any kind towards Janae?
I'm sorry, resentment?
Yeah.
No, sir.
Was it actually the opposite of that?
Did she resent him?
No. Was it did he exhibit the opposite of resentment? Did he have a positive relationship with Janae?
Very positive.
No further questions for the witness at this time.
He knew that Janae was his daughter, right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
And isn't it true that on many different occasions he would constantly try and get you to reduce the amount so that way he could get better jobs in different locations and things like that?
I'm not understanding what you're asking.
He would come to you and ask you to reduce the amount of child support that he owed you so he could get better jobs and get better paying jobs.
No, sir. And if I may elaborate, not asked to reduce, he asked me to have him taken off.
Okay. All right. So he asked you to take all of it away so he can get better paying jobs.
Not to get better paying jobs, so that way I can get more. He felt that if I took him off of child support, then he would be able to pay me more and do more.
Okay. So he's trying to get you to do away with the child support then so he could...
And get rid of the middleman.
Okay. How much was he paying in child support to you?
I don't recall. I can give you an approximate.
That's fine.
540, 560, 580. It was in the 500s.
Okay, somewhere around $500?
Upward of 500.
Between $500 and $600, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. All right, no further questions?
Redirect. Just to clarify, even after the reduction of the arrearage, he still owed you nearly $9,000 as of 2010, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
And juror, I have a question of this witness. All right, you can step down. Do we need to keep her further? There you go. You're free to go. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the next defense witness is Michael LaForte.
All right, come on up here, please, sir. Come on up here, please, sir. Face the clerk and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide up to the rail, please, sir. Proceed, Mr. Prince.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. LaForte, can you please state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
Yes, it's Michael F. LaForte, Michael, L-A, capital F-O-R-T-E.
Can you tell the jury what you do for a living now?
I'm a senior forensic consultant with Knox & Associates Forensic Consulting out of Jacksonville.
Okay. And what all does that entail?
We reconstruct, our main focus is shooting scenes, but we do crime scene reconstruction.
And can you tell us about some of the various components involved in crime scene reconstruction?
We review, we look at all the police reports, autopsy reports, crime scene photographs, any case materials that are involved in the case. We evaluate them and then see if we can come up to a conclusion.
Okay. And in order to be able to do that, have you had to go through any specialized education or training and gained any specialized experience?
Yes, I spent almost 30 years, 29 and a half years with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. From 74 until 1988, I was a patrol officer. In 1988, I transferred to the crime scene unit until my retirement in 2003. While I was in the crime scene unit, I processed a little over 9,500 crime scenes. Of that number, over 800 were death investigations, and of that number, over 500 were homicide scenes. Went to numerous courses, bloodstain pattern analysis, buried bodies, a number of different courses during that time period. When I retired in 2003, I had a consulting company where I did some training, put on courses around the Southeast and in Lima, Peru, taught bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction. 2009, I was hired back into law enforcement with the Duval County School Board Police until 2010, when I was hired by the Nassau County Sheriff's Office to start up their crime scene unit. There I wrote the policies and procedures for the crime scene unit. And in 2011, I was hired by Knox & Associates to come to work for them and to my current position.
And if you could, give us a little more detail about your training and experience as it pertains to blood spatter analysis specifically.
I attended multiple schools with the Sheriff's Office in bloodstain pattern analysis. After those schools, I trained the other crime scene people with the Sheriff's Office in bloodstain pattern analysis. It was ongoing training over those number of years in service courses.
And over your years in service, have you published or authored either parts of or in total papers, articles, or publications that were peer-reviewed?
After my retirement in 2003, I authored 3 books, 2 on crime scene procedures, processing crime scenes, collecting evidence, photography. My 3rd book was on photography, photographing examination quality photographs, which would be footwear, tire impressions, blood spatter, those kinds of things, fingerprints.
Okay. And have you ever testified in court as an expert?
I have.
Was that in various areas?
To the disciplines would
Yes,
be
sir.
bloodstain. I've done bloodstain pattern analysis testimony as well as crime scenes. I've testified in probably 7 or 8 jurisdictions here in Florida, and also in Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes, sir. Your Honor, at this time I would tender the witness.
Any for die?
You are.
You may proceed.
Once you were retained to work on this case, did you have an opportunity to review the crime scene photographs provided by the state?
Yes.
And as you went through and looked at the various photos that were taken, were you able to conduct some blood spatter analysis as it relates specifically to the foyer area where victim Randy Peters' body was found?
Yes.
Okay. And have you selected some photos to aid you in explaining to the jury what your analysis was essentially?
Yes,
Is that represented in this PowerPoint presentation here?
yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would request to move into evidence what's pre-marked for identification as defense 33 and as defense 33.
Any objection?
Make sure we're clear that 33 is the PowerPoint presentation.
Right.
Yeah, no, good.
All right, indeed. So we're admitting it, that means it's go to the jury,
Yes,
or
sir.
is this demonstrative?
I was just going to admit it. So,
Your Honor, I'm going to reserve till I see this in completion, because there may be portions that aren't appropriate to go. The photographs certainly should go back to the jury, but without seeing the entirety of the presentation, there may be something that's inappropriate to go back to the jury, so I'd like to reserve.
I'll reserve ruling on that
Thank you.
decision.
yes, sir. To be clear, Mr. Knox, will this aid you in explaining your findings to the jury?
Yes.
At this point, Your Honor, I would request to be able to publish it, at least as a demonstrative aid.
You
to
may.
PowerPoint.
And for record purposes, the state does not have an objection to that, Your Honor.
When you first select a photograph in order to explain to the jury how you kind of progressed through this process, what was it that you were noting, and what is it that you wanted to be able to show to the jury with these pictures, and this one in particular?
This shows the position of Brandy Peters on the foyer floor, and the bloodstain patterns on the back of the door, which is the south wall, and then the wall at her feet, which is the west wall. It also shows transferred blood on the carpet just to her right and on the tiled floor.
And can you explain to the jury, as you refer to these different areas, what blood transfer as opposed to blood spatter, cast off, all those different terms that you're going to use, what does all that mean?
Sure. On the west wall, the wall that's by her feet, you can see that, and I don't have a laser pointer to show you. Thanks. Thank you. This area right here, these lines would be transfer. These are consistent with a swipe mark. A swipe mark is a bloody object coming in contact with an area that doesn't have any blood, so it's transferring the blood to that surface. Those marks would be consistent, could be with a hand, could be from the feet. It's just some object is going back and forth across the wall, and there were several different directions. They were going left and right, and some were going left, up, and down. So that's significant as far as movement. With the overall bloodstain patterns, you want to look at it and see if you can come up with an event analysis, trying to sequence the events that took place in this area. And the amount of blood that's on the west wall would indicate that this area was most likely occurred first. There are heavier concentrations of the impact spatter on the back of the door. Those areas would have been after this, and then it rotates around to the east wall, which would be at her head. So it's most likely everything that's on the west wall there by her feet occurred prior to all of the other impact spatter.
And what is impact spatter as opposed to blood transfer?
Impact spatter is when an object comes in contact with a bloody surface and it disperses the blood. It projects it onto either a surface or the wall or on the floor.
Okay. And so based on the blood spatter and the blood transfer marks that you see there, what, if anything else, were you able to gather from this photo?
One thing that's significant is the positioning of her body and the right arm. It would indicate that there was a prolonged struggle in this area, and she was moving to a certain point. The stains that are on the back of the door, these are also transfer stains. The patterns were difficult to determine. They could be associated with her head coming in contact with that surface. There were some feathering marks, which are consistent with hair. Could also be shoulders, it could be arms that are making those impressions. But the number of injuries to her head when she's at this position here, close to this door, she would probably been incapacitated to do any movements on her own. So if the position of her arm, her right arm is straight out, it would be indicative of her being dragged by the attackers to the position that she's into now.
Okay. Anything else with this slide?
No. Well, if you could go back one more. Go back on. The other thing is the height of the impact spatter here above the door. The documentation by law enforcement indicated the width of the foyer was approximately 8 feet 4 inches. The depth of it was 5 feet from here to here, approximately 5 feet. And from the photographs, it looked like the height of the ceiling was about 10 feet. So that's the area that we're discussing here. Okay.
At the top of the cast-off pattern right there.
The wall goes farther up, so the door is 6'8", so then you're talking about maybe another foot above that. So what this photograph is showing is approximately 8 feet.
Okay. How about with this next photo?
This is the impact spatter that's on the east wall. This is from her head. Some of this impact spatter could have occurred earlier on and could be consistent with her being in some upright position. A lot of the impact spatter, these larger stains here, are more consistent with her being on the ground and a larger object creating those stains.
And why do you say that?
It's the volume of blood that we're looking at here. To disperse that size of a stain, it would require something that's heavy. And there's another photograph that we'll get to later, but it'll show more in detail what's on the back of the door with regards to objects.
Okay. Next slide.
Yes. This photograph is an autopsy photograph that depicts the trauma to her head. The autopsy report indicated there were over 17 blunt force injuries to her head. The ME determined that there was two impacts to this area. It also created fractures to the skull, and there was some brain tissue involved as well.
And how is that relevant to your spatter pattern analysis?
Well, it goes to looking at the injuries and trying to determine what could have inflicted these injuries, whether it could have been just one instrument or there were multiple objects.
Okay. And knowing what types of instruments are involved in causing the injuries is relevant to the type of cast-off pattern or spatter pattern we're going to see?
The type of impact spatter, yes. As I said earlier, the ME just determined in excess of 17 blunt force injuries to her head. What we're seeing here is different shapes. Some are a little bit curved, some are straight, and in the different parts, some are linear, some are, as in the previous photo, massive trauma.
Anything else from this photograph?
No. This shows another injury on the left side, and it's pretty destructive laceration there on the head, and this is different from the ones that were on the right side of the head, so it looks like a different object. This is an ovoid depression in the skull, ovoid, and basically round, but it's indicative of some type of heavy object that created this pattern. This depression also in the skull is indicative of some heavy object that created this type of injury, not something small and light. The medical examiner identified 3 different types of injuries here on the forehead as teardrop shaped, elongated, and triangular. Some of these injuries could have been made by a firearm. All of them possibly could have been, but the difference in the appearance would indicate that's possibly a couple of different weapons that would have made these injuries. And this is a curved injury that's on the top, near the hairline on the top of the head. And understanding the impacts or the number of blunt trauma injuries to the head and what they look like, and that you have depressions in the skull that are ovoid or rounded, would indicate that to create this type of spatter, these large drops here, it had to be some type of long, heavy object, baseball bat, a 2x4, something that had some mass to it, and the ability for the person to swing it hard. To create that kind of cast-off, that height, you would have to deliver a lot of force, and standing over somebody with a small, light object is not going to disperse that kind of volume of blood. It's heavy, and this was created while the head was near the back of the door, And why I can say that is because the blood actually traveled between this curtain on the front of the door, on the window, and went behind it and impacted on the front of the window. So there was enough force to send this blood 8-9 feet up. There's even blood up on the transom window here, large volume spatter. So again, it's to get it that high, to get that type of volume of blood requires a lot of force and a large object to do that.
Can you explain a little bit about the physics of why a larger object would be required as opposed to a small object to cause the cast-off to be, number one, in that volume, and number two, at that height?
Well, we're talking about gravity. I mean, gravity is trying to pull it down. For something that large to travel that high has to have a lot of energy behind it. When the spatter actually hits, there's enough energy in it that it actually it continues on. There's satellite spatter. If I had a close-up photograph, you could see little tiny satellites going straight up. So the force was enough when it hits the surface, it continues going up the wall. And I'm talking, maybe a ½ inch or 2 inch. There wasn't any scales on this, so I couldn't tell you the exact length of those satellite spatters. But that indicates the amount of force that was used to create that type of spatter.
When in the process of inflicting these wounds would the cast-off have come off of whatever the object is?
Well, that's two different types. Impact spatter, when you have a surface that has a lot of blood on it and it impacts, and the object impacts, it disperses that blood. And the energy takes the blood out, but the energy then breaks this large clump of blood into smaller droplets. That's what the impact spatter is. That's what impacts and creates all that, the blood spatter on the walls. The blood is actually coming apart. With cast-off is what you're asking about. Cast-off comes off of the weapon. If I'm swinging a baseball bat, the cast-off blood it has a cohesive property to it. It's sticky. The viscosity of blood is 4 to 5. The viscosity of water is 1. So when you put a drop of water, it runs everywhere. With blood, it sticks, and it has a cohesive factor to it. So if I'm swinging an object, the blood, until it breaks that cohesiveness from the surface, then it will fly off into space, and it'll hit whatever surface is around. So as you're swinging, the centrifugal force is bringing the blood out, and then it will hit whatever surface. But there were no photographs of the ceiling in the materials that we looked at. So I have no idea if there was any cast-off marks on the ceiling, which is where, if you're swinging like this, is where you would expect to find them on the walls. The problem with this type of scene is there was so much blood on the back of that door, it would be almost impossible to pick out cast-off patterns versus impact spatter patterns. You wouldn't be able to delineate. You may be able to tell something on the ceiling, but like I said, there were no photographs of those. With cast-off patterns, you're able, hopefully, to determine how many swings were involved. But that wasn't done here.
Okay. Why is it that a greater volume of blood corresponds to a heavier object? Can you explain that to us?
Well, it has to do with leverage. If you're close up to the body when you're striking it, you're depending on if it would be a firearm or if it would be just a small club, you can't deliver that kind of energy to that surface. It's the same thing as if you're trying to remove a nut or bolt off of and it's tight and you can't get it off. If you use a small wrench, you can't do the leverage with it. But if you get a longer wrench, you can then apply more pressure, even pressure, you can usually break it loose. So that's the same thing here. If you're farther away from the surface, you're able to swing and get much more force behind it when it strikes. Also, the weight is important. It's got to have some mass to it to create that type of spatter.
Is it even possible for a firearm to have caused the high volume impact spatter up at the top of the photograph?
No, because at this point, the victim's going to be on the ground.
How do we know that?
Well, the number of injuries to her head, I mean, she may have early on received several blunt force injuries to her head while she's upright, either kneeling, standing. But as those injuries are being inflicted, it's unlikely that she would have been able to stand there and take that. So, and the indications are based on you've got the large area here, then it's going straight up, that she was most likely on the ground when those were being delivered.
So by the time the cast-off spatter at the top of the photograph is being
Yes.
Anything else with this photograph?
No.
What are we looking at here?
This is showing the east side of the foyer floor. There's a lot of impact spatter that's radiating out towards the east wall here. And this is indicating that after she was moved from this position to her final position of rest here, indicates the location of her right arm that was straight out. But that there were blows struck in this position while she was on the ground. The blood is radiating out and away from her head and onto the wall. The other thing too is on the side where her feet were, all of this blood was smeared on the floor. And there's not a lot of impact spatter. When you hit an object, when you hit a body with an object, depending on how that object comes in contact, you're going to have forward spatter, which we see here, but you also can get back spatter, which is the blood coming back towards the direction of the forces originated. So blood can be dispersed 360 degrees, again, but it depends on how that object impacts the surface. But we don't see a lot of impact spatter over here, and that could indicate a couple of things, that there's an intermediary object. Now her body was in this position here, her feet were down here, so that could explain why there wasn't any. There also could be an explanation of somebody standing at this location here as the beating continues, and they're blocking the spatter from being deposited on the floor. This is a more close view, but you see the blood that's been smeared around the floor. There was a drop of blood right here that's on top of the smeared blood, and there were some more drops of blood here. The photographs weren't adequate enough for me to tell direction. This one here appears to be pretty round, which would indicate it originated from above. It's dripping down, so it's a passive drip pattern. I can't tell what these are. These could be cast off, these could be impact spatters that came from the body and just deposited over there. But when we see this at the crime scene and you see blood, a different type of pattern that's on top of the smeared blood, it indicates that there could be another blood source. Somebody could be injured in here other than the victim and is depositing blood within the crime scene. This stain was not collected, so I don't know if it's the victim's blood or if it would have been somebody else's blood. The same way with these stains over here, they weren't collected, so with the source is unknown.
Thank you. Based on the volume and height of the cast off,
Can you opine about roughly what the weight of the depositing instrument would have been?
I don't think I can find it as to the weight. Something that would be solid, fairly wide. A baseball bat is probably on the order of that. When you look at that type of injury that was to the left side of her head, that severe trauma, and then you've got the ovoid fractures to the depression in the skull, would be indicative of some type of instrument like that, like a baseball bat.
Combining the nature of the wounds that you discussed and particularly the cast-off pattern, is there any way that a firearm could have caused those injuries and deposited those high-volume, high-height cast-off?
Not the high ones. A firearm could have been used to inflict some of those injuries and to disperse some of that impact spatter that's on the lower parts of the walls and the door. That's possible. As far as the impact spatter that's high up on the door, up around 8-9 feet, no, there's no way that a firearm would have done that.
Thank you. I have no further questions for the witness.
Well, yes, Your Honor. Mr. LaForte, you work for Knox & Associates?
I do.
You work with Michael Knox.
I do.
Y'all are, I guess, a team, and I guess you probably have more employees than just the two of y'all, correct?
Well, we're the only two consultants. We have office staff.
Sure. Both you and Mr. Knox are being paid for this particular testimony by the defense, correct?
We're being paid by the state, yes. But I'm salaried. I get the same salary every month.
What do you mean you're being paid by the state? You weren't hired by the state attorney's office, were you?
No, state of Florida is paying.
Through the defense?
Through the defense, yes.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure that was clear.
How much have you been paid so far?
How much has Knox & Associates been paid?
No, you.
Well, I get $2,500 a month.
Okay, so you get paid no matter what. The Knox Associates actually gets the main thing, and then you get dispersed for your salary?
Right, I get paid every month That's salary. Like I
All
said,
right.
it's salary, same salary.
All right, then do you know how much Knox and Associates would have paid for this, for your testimony as well as Michael Knox?
I don't.
Okay. Fair to say it's a pretty good chunk of change?
Well, I'm sure it's probably added up. I mean, we've been doing this for a while.
Sure, I understand. Now you say that all these injuries, it's possible that they could have been made by a firearm. All the injuries to Mrs. Peters could have been made by a firearm, correct?
No, I didn't say all of them. I said some of them could have been.
Okay. Which ones did you find that she couldn't have?
The massive injuries to the left side of the head, the round depression in her skull, the other one that we showed that was a pretty deep depression in the skull. Those wouldn't have been done by a revolver.
Okay. You're saying that that round object could not have been done by the butt of a .32 pistol
No,
being struck?
no, I don't
Why?
believe so.
Why?
The energy, the amount of force that would take to do that.
Okay. Amount of force to take to do that. You would agree with me the injuries that are inflicted on here, you're homicide detective for a long time, correct?
No, crime scene detective.
Crime scene detective, okay.
Yes.
You've been to a lot of crime scenes and homicides, correct?
Many, hundreds,
Been involved in a lot of homicides.
over 500.
Been involved in situations with domestic violence.
Yes.
Homicides. You would agree with me that the infliction of these wounds were done in a manner that is both personal and very anger involved, would you not?
I would say there's a lot of overkill, yes.
Okay. And that's consistent with someone having a personal vendetta and a lot of anger against somebody, correct?
Possible, yes.
Okay. You would agree with me that not everybody can use an object in the same manner. Different persons can use it with more force than others.
Possible.
Okay. Would you agree that I can probably use something that I'm swinging or using as a club with more force than Ms. Dugan?
Probably.
Okay. Fair enough. She's probably in better shape than I am. But regardless, you would also agree, of course, that, say, for instance, Peyton Manning can throw a football farther than I can, right?
Yes, farther than me.
Sure. So the amount of force that is done is certainly conditioned upon the person that's exerting the force, is it not?
Well, there's other things to look at, and that would be the impact spatter itself.
Okay, we'll get to the impact spatter itself in a second, but you would agree with me that the object that is being used and the amount of force that's being used behind that object is in fact indicative and really controlled by the person that is exuding the force.
Could be.
Could be?
Yes.
How could it not be?
It depends on the person that's doing it, but
Right,
possible.
right. How could it not be? How could the person that's swinging an object and impacting with another object not be the one that controls the amount of force that they use, not be controlling of the amount of that force?
I don't know. I mean, there's other variables I would think.
Like what?
Their health, their condition, if they're using left hand versus right hand, there are a number of instances that you could come up with that probably, would dictate that there's variables. There's variables in everything.
Sure, but their health, their conditioning, the left and the right hand is controlled by the person exerting the force, is it not?
At the time it's being done, correct.
Correct, right. So the person that's exerting the force is the one that actually is the one that's in control of how much force is being used.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So and again, we would agree that different persons of different build and different strengths can exert force a lot more than other persons, can they not?
Possible, yes.
Possible?
Possible, yes.
Okay, how is it not possible?
Well, nothing's 100%, but given your scenario, yes, it's possible.
Okay. And someone like Mr. Segura that's used to dealing with metals, who's a very strong individual, built very large individual, is in very good shape, is certainly able to exert a great deal of force in using an object, is he not?
Probably.
Okay. And now, let's talk about the blood spatter we're talking about here. You've heard the term every action has an equal and opposite reaction, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So essentially what that means is the amount of force that you utilize is conditioned to the amount of force that's coming off of an object, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're swinging an object with an extreme amount of force and you're coming back, it's going to go a lot farther than it would if you're swinging it in a less strengthened
mode, correct?
Well, you're describing two different things now. You're describing impact spatter, and now you're coming back. That's cast off. So that's two different things.
Oh, correct, okay. So you're saying that all of that blood is in fact impact spatter and not cast off?
Yes.
Okay. How can you tell the difference?
Cast off has to do, the patterns from cast off are consistent with the type of object that's being used. If you have, let's say, a knife, a butcher knife, and you're stabbing somebody, as you're bringing it back, the cast off pattern is going to be linear. Okay, it's going to be just a single line basically going straight up or coming down. When you're using a larger object, like a baseball bat, the cast off that would come off of that would be the width of the baseball bat. So if you have the cast off patterns that you can identify, a lot of times the cast off pattern will lead you to the type of weapon that's being used. And like I said, on the back of that door, on that south wall, there was so much impact spatter, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to pick out the impact, the separate impact spatter patterns, or I'm sorry, the cast off patterns. So that's the difference. Impact spatter, when you hit the surface, the blood radiates out. It expands the farther away you are, the bigger the cone. So, of course, the closer you are, the narrower the cone. But that's the difference between the two.
Okay. And then in this particular case, as you just said, the door itself, you can't really tell which spatter it is, whether it's cast off or in fact impact spatter, correct?
The size of those large things that we're talking about at the top of the door, those are consistent with impact. And again, that would be from the initial impacts.
Okay.
They're not cast off.
All right. You made a determination as to where the certain injuries occurred, where she was lying down because she would have been lying down because of the injuries, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How were you able to determine which injuries occurred when?
I can't.
Okay. So you don't know when each injury occurred, do you?
No, I don't know when each injury occurred. I know that where she likely, based on the volume of blood that's on the west wall versus what's on the south and east walls, that spatter, those transfer patterns occurred prior to the massive blood loss.
Okay. So there is a possibility that the impact for one of those injuries was while she was standing up, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
That's not possible?
Given those, no, I don't believe so.
Okay. Why?
Well, if you want to go back to it, I can show you, but there was a large volume of blood that was lower down on the door, maybe 2.5, 3 feet. Could she have been upright? Could she have been kneeling? I don't think so even at that. She'd have been lower. She'd have to be lower than that to get it at that position. Then you have the other large volume that's higher up on the wall.
But she had more than one massive injury to her head. Isn't it entirely feasible that she's standing upright, one of those massive injuries hit her, knocks her down, and then the rest of the massive injuries occur while she's on the ground?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, fair enough. That's your opinion, correct?
It's my opinion.
You would agree with me, a medical examiner can probably talk a little bit more about the sequence of events or not, as far as the injuries, right?
I don't think they can sequence the events when they occurred.
Okay, no more than you can.
Again, it's the totality of the evidence. It's basing it not only on the injuries, but it's also on the impact spatter that's on the walls.
Okay. And you're saying that is all much more consistent with a baseball bat?
A baseball bat is an example.
Or type of.
It's type of something that has a large mass and that has some weight to it.
Okay. So you're looking for something that's got large mass and weight to it?
Yes.
Okay. Baseball bat's made of wood usually, sometimes they're metal.
Correct.
Okay. Gun is made of metal.
Correct.
Okay. So you're talking about really as far as mass goes, they're kind of the same. They're just one's longer than the other. Weight-wise, they're going to be about the same. Baseball bats are 28 ounces, 26 ounces, something along those lines. Firearms are roughly going to be the same weight, are they not?
I've never weighed them, but I would think they may be close, depending on what type of you're talking about. But the other thing is, somebody holding a revolver or a pistol versus standing back, the dynamics of hitting somebody close up, even if you're exerting a lot of pressure, you're blocking some of that blood. Okay, your hand is here. the baseball bat or whatever the large object would be, you would be back away from it, and you're being able to apply more power to that surface and dispelling that blood. I think, given what you're asking, it's more likely that it's a larger object versus all of it coming from a firearm.
Okay. Well, you would agree somebody who's swinging a firearm and they're using their arms, you're talking about, well, in my case, you're talking about 3 feet armed or something like that and down. There's pretty good range there, is there not?
Yeah,
Okay.
but not as much as you could get from standing back and wielding a larger object.
Sure. You have a baseball bat, you extend it another, what are they? They're normally about 34 inches, I think they are, is what baseball bats are, roughly 32, 34 inches. So
Right.
almost another 3 feet.
Right, with a 10-foot ceiling, you've got more than enough room to stand up and swing that 180-degree arc and come on down.
Okay, fair enough. But you would also agree with me that you could also do it with the 4 foot or 3 foot arc with your arm if you're angry in a personal manner.
Well, the thing is you're going to have to be down on your hands and knees if the person's down there.
Sure.
It's not something, with a baseball bat, you're standing up and you're putting your full weight behind it. With a firearm, you're going to be on your knees and you can't deliver the same amount of energy, I don't believe.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Mr. Fuchs was asking you briefly about left-handedness versus right-handedness. No determination could have been made regarding which hand an individual used to inflict wounds in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why is that?
Well, it's next to impossible to figure out if you're left or right-handed based solely on the impact spatter. You'd have to have probably more information. And given the amount of spatter that was on those walls, there would be no way to say left or right-handed.
Okay. And that's because a person's body position and how they're swinging an object can change, and it would impact the wall in exactly the same way, regardless of which hand it was being swung with.
Correct. And obviously, with the spatter patterns that are on 3 different walls, and it's evident that her body had moved, changed positions. So yeah, it wasn't static. There was always movement involved.
Okay. Mr. Fuchs asked you about an individual's physical abilities and strength and all that. Even a good person, a person in good health and in good shape and of, stronger than average, would a person be able with a .32 caliber revolver to exert the amount of force necessary to cause cast-off in that volume at that height?
Just want to correct, it would be impact spatter, and no.
Okay. How, if at all, would it impact an assailant's ability to exert force if within, say, 90 days of the incident, if they had undergone invasive surgery with their abdominal wall being sliced 9 inches?
Your Honor, I'm jacked as a speculation.
I would think it would have some effect to be able to not only swing, but to get into the position that would be necessary.
Okay. And even if the cast-off is coming off the object at the top of the motion and the person is standing, is the volume and height of the cast-off in any way consistent with it coming off of a firearm?
No.
Could it possibly have come off of a firearm, or given the volume and height, is that impossible?
It's possible. With cast-off, basically all you can tell is where the object was in space when the blood left the surface. And if it's a linear object, if it's a linear line, you might be able to determine that. If it's a wider line cast-off pattern, it may be indicative, but it would just depend on the cast-off pattern and what it looks like. So again,
Okay.
cast-off it just depends on what the impact angle is and where that comes back to in space, and that would tell you where it was when it came off the weapon.
Okay. Given the totality of the blood spatter evidence we have here, both with the impact spatter, the blood transfer patterns, and the cast-off, can we say definitively that a .32 revolver did not cause the pattern the pattern that you observed and testified about here?
It did not create the large volume patterns that were on the top of the door in the middle. Absolutely did not do that.
Thank you. No further questions.
Hey, juror, I have a question of this witness. All right, you step in.
Your Honor, this time, pursuant to stipulation before I close the defense case, the defendant
Correct, Mr. Pugh?
It is, Your Honor. They were asked about during this testimony, and I anticipate they'll hear about it anyway.
So admit defense exhibit 3, was it?
Yes, sir. 3, A,
Right.
B, and C.
And was what was shown to the jury the entirety of the PowerPoint?
For Mr. LaForte, yes, sir.
There's more on that document,
No, sir, that's it.
right? So does the state have any objection?
No,
to
the
it?
state does not have any objection, Your Honor. I did
Okay.
note on the junk drive, there are 3 or 4 different things in there that had to do with his notes. I want to make sure that we burn the PowerPoint itself only onto a disk for them to take back.
All right,
We'll need that thing.
all right, we need to make sure, but it's admitted with that understanding?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's go sidebar. All right, so that will conclude the defense case with the exception of one witness. They had one witness that they had a scheduling problem with that's going to have to testify Monday morning. So the next thing we're going to do is move into the state's rebuttal evidence. I don't think it's going to be confusing, but make sure you understand what we're doing. We're going to move into the rebuttal of what the defense has presented so far. And then Monday morning, they have one other reconstruction expert that they wish to call, the defense wish to call, and the state's going to reserve their reconstruction expert to testify after that witness. So that's going to be the sequence of events. I think it'll be fairly clear cut, but I want to make sure you understand. The lawyers been working together and appreciate that they're cooperating, make sure that we can keep things flowing, even though we've had a few scheduling issues that we need to deal with. So with that, let's take 15 minutes and we'll start into the state rebuttal case.
And Your Honor, can we remain for just a moment?
Yep,
Thank you.
let the jury step back. Might be seated, Mr. Pugh.
Your Honor, just to let you know, procedural, Mr. Prince and I discussed the witnesses. Mr. Yao is going to be testifying in rebuttal as to both Mr. LaForte and Mr. Knox's testimony. Rather than call him today and trying to call him back again after Knox, we both agreed that he just wait till Monday to do the rebuttal.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Yes, sir. Just one.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll take 15 minutes.
Thank you.